Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. When you hear a government accused of being soft on a powerful global rival, how often is that a simple, clear truth? And how often is it, well, just skillful political framing designed to score maximum points?
That really is the core question, isn't it? Especially with the current noise around UK-China relations. We're looking today at recent events, specifically this massive, highly controversial plan for a new Chinese embassy in London.
Right, the Royal Mint Court site.
Exactly. And also the abrupt and, frankly, embarrassing collapse of that major espionage case.
Both flashpoints being used to push this narrative that the UK has somehow lost its nerve, fundamentally lost its resolve when it comes to China.
That's the claim, yeah.
So our mission today is to look past those headlines. We want to see if the actual record, the facts, support this idea of wholesale capitulation.
Or if maybe the government is actually navigating a far messier, much more complex path. Selective engagement mixed with some pretty serious necessary security hardening.
It's a high-stakes balancing act, for sure. Let's start with the geography and the architecture, the embassy itself. Okay, so Royal Mint Court, East London. China wants to build its largest diplomatic mission in all of Europe right there.
Huge site.
But this isn't just any piece of land, is it? This is where it gets really interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
This is the same place where silver paid as ransom to Britain after the Opium Wars back in 1844 was once held. That historical context is just dynamite.
It truly is. I mean, that history completely transforms this. It's not just some dry planning dispute anymore.
No.
It becomes this massive, politically toxic, symbolic concession.
Yeah.
Just imagine the political weight of approving China's largest European mission on the very land linked to, well, a century and a half of historic humiliation and exploitation from their perspective.
Yeah.
That background alone just ramps up the political heat on the government immensely right now.
And that heat is definitely coming from the opposition. You have critics, including opposition conservatives like Kimmy Badenoch, pushing a really hard line against approval.
Calling it appeasement, pure and simple.
Exactly. And citing security concerns, too. Two main ones, right. The site's proximity to crucial city fiber optic cables.
Very close.
And the fact that some of the building plans they submitted are still completely redacted, blacked out, meaning almost nobody knows exactly what kind of facilities they intend to build there.
But this is where that simple political framing, the idea that the government is just passively rolling over, it starts to look a bit flimsy when you dig in.
How so?
Well, first, there's the whole issue of reciprocity. Let's not forget, Beijing is currently dragging its feet, slowing down approvals for the UK's own embassy renovation projects over in Beijing.
Right. So London's decision here isn't happening in a vacuum. It's a piece of diplomatic leverage.
Potentially, yes.
That makes sense. But still, it was the central government who called in the decision back in 2022. They effectively overturned the local opposition.
That's right. Tower Hamlets Council said no initially.
And they pushed the final ruling deadline all the way out to October 21st, 2025. Why take that step? Why risk the huge political fallout for what looks like, on the surface, just a property deal?
Because I think the argument is that planning law isn't the same thing as policy capitulation. You have government figures like the housing minister, Steve Reed, who've explicitly requested the unredacted plan.
Okay, so they're demanding more detail.
Precisely. Demanding full, transparent sight of those designs and threatening to impose really severe, specific conditions, maybe a harder security perimeter, maybe restricting certain building features. That's just standard risk mitigation in these situations.
So demanding detail is actually the opposite of being soft.
You could argue that, yes. It's about managing the risk, not ignoring it.
Okay. And if they demand the plans and then impose tough conditions, they can still argue they are managing the risk effectively. But I want to pause on something you mentioned earlier, something quite surprising from the analysis we looked at. The idea that consolidating China's diplomatic presence into one massive, central monitored compound might actually make official oversight monitoring easier for UK security services.
Yeah, that's the counterintuitive bit.
Is that view being challenged internally? Because politically, that sounds like an incredibly hard sell to the public.
Oh, it is a politically difficult message, absolutely. But the reports suggest security services have assessed the risk as manageable, partly because of that consolidation.
How does that work?
Well, their perspective is operational.
Right.
Right. Think about it.
Yeah.
A dispersed network of smaller offices, maybe some undeclared sites, that's much harder to track effectively than one central known hub where they can focus their surveillance assets.
So from a counterintelligence standpoint, focusing resources is just more efficient.
That seems to be the logic. The government is essentially betting that this operational security advantage outweighs the political messaging crisis it creates.
Okay, we've covered the real estate battleground. Let's pivot now to the more cloak and dagger side of things, specifically that shocking collapse in the high-profile spy case. That really hit the headlines back in mid-September.
Yes, that was a significant embarrassment, no doubt about it. Charges were suddenly dropped against two British citizens, Chris Cash and Chris Berry.
They were accused of sharing sensitive information with a Chinese contact, right?
That was the allegation, yes.
And the failure, it seems, wasn't really about a lack of evidence of something happening, but a fatal legal flaw, something rooted in an almost unbelievably archaic piece of legislation.
That's exactly it. The case was filed under the Official Secrets Act of 1911.
What?
1911.
Wow.
And that 1911 law, that's the absolute key here. It required prosecutors to prove that the information shared actually aided an enemy.
An enemy. That sounds very World War I.
It is. And following a legal clarification in 2025, which actually stemmed from a separate Russian espionage precedent, interestingly, prosecutors found themselves in a bind.
What was the bind?
They were required to get formal testimony from government ministers, actually in court, stating that China met the legal definition of an enemy during the specific period the alleged spying took place.
And what would that testimony have actually meant in diplomatic terms?
Oh, it would have been explosive. Legally, it would have meant declaring that China was operating under the threat of open warfare against the UK at that time.
Right. You can see why ministers would balk at that.
Completely unwilling. Providing that statement publicly in court, it would have just detonated the existing diplomatic relationship.
Yeah.
So without that testimony,
The case collapsed.
the case collapsed.
Yeah.
So crucially, it wasn't really a failure to catch spies, perhaps, but a failure of a statute designed for 1911 when the concept of an enemy was, very black and white. War or not war.
Okay, so this is where the narrative of enduring softness really starts to wobble, isn't it? Because if the government was truly serious about espionage, why rely on that ancient law? Did they just miss a chance to modernize earlier, or was the fix already happening?
The fix was absolutely in the works. In fact, it was already done. The government had already addressed this massive legislative gap.
Oh.
They modernized the whole framework with the National Security Act of 2023. That new law gets rid of that outdated, diplomatically radioactive term, enemy.
And replaces it with?
It replaces it with the much broader, more flexible, and frankly more realistic term, foreign power, for all future cases.
So they closed the loophole.
They closed the loophole. The problem was simply timing. This specific case had to be prosecuted under the law that was in force when the alleged crimes actually occurred.
Yeah.
You can't apply laws retroactively.
Right, of course. So using the collapse of this one case in 2025 to claim ongoing, enduring softness sort of conveniently ignores the fact that the statute had already been fixed for the future.
Precisely. It misses the bigger picture of legislative reform.
And if we look beyond just the courtroom drama, this leads to a really important question. If the political narrative paints the government as soft, what is the actual security establishment the spies themselves saying and doing?
Well, they are practically screaming the opposite. The UK intelligence agencies, MI6 for foreign intelligence, GCHQ for signals intelligence, MI5 for domestic, they are publicly, and I gather internally, very aggressively prioritizing China.
How explicit.
MI6 has publicly called China its single greatest priority, full stop. But maybe the most significant data point comes from GCHQ.
The listening post.
Yeah. They now explicitly devote more resources, people, time, technology, budget to China than to any other single mission.
Wait, hang on. GCHQ is spending more on China than on Russia? Or Iran? Or even counterterrorism?
That's what the reporting indicates, more than any other mission.
It's a tectonic shift, isn't it? A massive realignment of strategic focus that, frankly, you don't hear much about in the day-to-day headlines.
It absolutely is. And that one data point, it fundamentally undermines the simplistic argument that the UK security establishment is somehow standing down on China. The opposite seems true.
Okay, so if the UK isn't actually soft, then it seems it's practicing this highly precarious policy we could maybe call, I don't know, friends with benefits, trying to keep a critical economic relationship going while simultaneously building up defensive walls.
That's exactly the kind of nuance that political soundbites just steamroll over, isn't it? You have to look at the economic reality check here.
Which is?
Yes, the UK has exposure to China, trade-wise, But its trade with mainland China is actually quite limited, somewhere around 5.5% to 6% of total UK trade.
That's surprisingly low.
It's significant, don't get me wrong, but it's much smaller than the share the UK trades with the US or the EU. China is important, but it's not economically dominant for the UK in the way it is for some other countries.
And despite all the security tensions, the economic engagement is continuing. We saw the UK revive high-level talks, didn't they? Secured about $600 million in deals earlier this year.
Yeah, back in January 2025. Across finance, agri-food, green finance. The policymakers seem to be operating on the premise that, well, engagement isn't automatically indulgence. You can talk business without giving the farm away.
And how does this compare to what other European countries are doing? London often gets framed, maybe unfairly, as being inherently softer than, say, Brussels or Paris.
It does get framed that way. But again, that often ignores decisive actions the UK took quite a while ago.
Such as?
Well, take the semiconductor industry, absolutely critical tech. We've recently heard quite a bit about the Netherlands nationalizing Nexperia, a Chinese-owned chip maker, on security grounds. Big move.
Right.
But the UK had already acted really decisively in that same sector back in 2022. Remember, that year, London blocked a Chinese-owned firm's acquisition of Newport Wafer Fab down in Wales.
Ah, yes, Newport Wafer Fab. Why was that particular one so important?
Because Newport Wafer Fab specialized in compound semiconductors. That's foundational tech for things like 5G and advanced military applications, next-generation power electronics. Really sensitive stuff.
So blocking that sale showed the UK was willing to use its industrial policy tools, its security levers, to protect critical sectors, even if it caused diplomatic friction.
Exactly. It was a clear signal.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the overall pattern in London, it seems less like softness and more like, well, selective engagement plus selective hardening.
Right.
It's a hedging strategy, isn't it? Not outright surrender, but definitely not broad decoupling either.
And part of that strategy, presumably, means keeping lines open on issues that affect everyone, regardless of the rivalry. Global issues.
Absolutely essential. You can't wall yourself off entirely.
Take AI safety, for instance. The government made a point of inviting China to the 2023 AI Safety Summit at Bletchley Park, and they maintain an active dialogue. That seems to reflect a very practical belief that these huge global risks, things like biosecurity threats or the misuse of powerful AI models, are just best mitigated when all the major players, even your geopolitical rivals, are actually at the table talking about them.
You simply can't solve truly global problems unilaterally, can you? It requires some level of cooperation, however difficult.
And that dialogue apparently extends right up to the highest levels of the military, too.
We saw a very significant move back in April. The UK's chief of the defense staff visited China's National Defense University. That was the first visit of its kind in a decade.
10 years. What's the message there?
The message couldn't be clearer, I think. When tensions are high, direct military-to-military communication is absolutely essential. It's about preventing miscalculation, avoiding accidental escalation, keeping channels open even when things are frosty. So when you put all these pieces together, the legal reforms like the National Security Act, the operational priorities of the spy agencies like GCHQ, the block tech sales like Newport Wafer Fab, and the continued economic and strategic dialogue, the UK policy seems pretty unambiguously rooted in this concept of de-risking. That's the buzzword, but it seems accurate here.
De-risking, meaning?
Meaning tightening controls, quite aggressively, in clearly defined high-risk sectors, chips, critical infrastructure, sensitive data, research, while deliberately keeping channels open for the big, practical, often global issues like finance, AI safety, climate change.
So it's a calculated attempt to keep security absolutely paramount, but without completely abandoning dialogue where it's necessary or potentially useful?
That's the tightrope they're trying to walk. Security first, but dialogue where possible.
That strategic tightrope walk really is the core of it all, isn't it? De-risking requires constant vigilance and hardening, while engagement inherently involves political risk. So thinking ahead, especially with that Royal Mint court decision looming on October 21st,
That deadline's coming up.
what specific non-redacted plans or guarantees do you think the UK should really demand to prove that this is genuine risk mitigation, to show that planning law doesn't just become policy capitulation by default? That's the question listeners might want to mull over. Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.